Okay. Hello, welcome everyone to the UKCDR webinar on preventing harm in research. My name is Marta Tufet and I'm the Executive Director of UKCDR, and I'll be chairing today's webinar. Before we start, I wanted to say a few words about UKCDR for those of you who don't know us. We are a major collaborative of major UK research funders that are interested in international development research. And our role is to promote coherence, collaboration and joint action among these funders. And it's really fantastic to see so many of you here today. I don't think we were ever expecting so many. We have had over 700 participants registered from across the sector. And this interest is really remarkable and also speaks to the importance of the issue at hand. So I'm really delighted to welcome you all here today to speak about this very important topic of safeguarding. At UKCDR, we strongly believe that everyone involved in the international development research chain, from research funders, planners, practitioners to local community members, have the right to stay safe from harm. And that's why, together with many of our members, we wanted to contribute to the wider efforts across the sector that are aiming to tackle this issue. But we felt it was important to take a research lens. And we know that research presents specific situations in which harms can occur that are very different to the international sector more widely. And so that's why for the past 18 months, we have been working with funders of research and beyond to develop a set of principles and best practice guidance on safeguarding. And these aim to anticipate, mitigate, address potential and actual harms in the funding, design, delivery and dissemination of research. We launched this guidance back in April in 2020, and the purpose of today's webinar is to provide you with an overview of this guidance, but you also get an opportunity to hear from funders who have been involved throughout the process of development of the guidance and how they plan to apply the guidance. And we will also hear about different approaches that are taken by researchers to prevent and address harm in the sector. And finally, we will have an opportunity for answers and questions at the end. But before I hand over to our first speaker, I'll take a few minutes to run through a few housekeeping points. This has already been explained in the Q&A section, which you will find at the top right-hand side of your screen. And as this is a Microsoft Teams Live, you will only be able to see the presenters on your screen and not the other participants. But you can still ask questions through the Q&A function at the top right of the screen. And you can also upvote other people's questions by pressing the like button on the questions that you like most. And at the end, we will pick the questions which are most upvoted for discussion at the end. When you ask a question, we do ask you to include your name and organization in the question box so we know who it's coming from, and highlight if it's addressed to a particular presenter. And rest assured that if we do not have time to go through all of the questions, we will keep any unanswered questions and compile an FAQ sheet, which we will share with participants. And finally, just a reminder that the meeting will be recorded, so you will have access to this after the meeting, and it can be shared with your colleagues who have not been able to participate. Okay, so it is now my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Charlotte Watts, who's the Chief Scientific Advisor to DFID, and is also a member of the Strategic Coherence for ODA Research Board, the SCORE board, which governs our organization, UKCDR. And she's been a true champion of this work, and I'll pass over to her to provide some opening remarks. Okay, so I've just received a message that Charlotte is running a little bit late. So what we'll do is we'll move on to the next speaker, and then when Charlotte comes in, she can provide her remarks. So I will now hand over to Sheila Mburu. Sheila is one of our research and policy officers here at UKCDR, and she's been doing a fantastic job leading our work on safeguarding and also equitable partnerships. And so Sheila's going to walk us through the process of developing the guidance, what it contains and how to use it. So over to you, Sheila.
Okay, hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's a real pleasure to have all of you here. So I'm going to, as Marta mentioned, talk about some of the work that we've been doing around safeguarding in the context of international development research, and talk through the guidance that we've produced. So to start with, I'll basically give an outline of why this work is important and why safeguarding, specifically in the context of international development research, is important, and also outline what we mean when we're talking about safeguarding in international development research. I'll talk about how we develop the guidance, what the guidance is, and how it can be used. So since the new UK aid strategy in 2015 and the increase in ODA funding for research, there's been a greater number of UK universities who are increasingly engaged in international development research. And so while many universities actually have a really long history of being engaged in international development research, there are many others who are in unfamiliar territory regarding safeguarding policy and practice in the international context. And so we recognise that there's lots of work on safeguarding in the NGO and the international development sector more broadly. And so we're really not seeking to duplicate that, but this work really builds on that NGO sector to highlight specific safeguarding issues that happen in the context of research that need a different approach. And we also draw from the wealth of knowledge in research integrity and research ethics. And so in thinking about some of the issues that are specific to the context of international development research, we know that there are often gendered and racialized dynamics within research, but also specifically in the international context. So those of particular races or gender being at higher risk of harm or exploitation whilst undertaking research or whilst involved in the research process. We also know that there are historical power dynamics due to either colonial histories or wealth disparities between different countries, but also financial disparities between different actors involved in the research process. So between international researchers and local research staff, or between junior and senior research staff. And we know that this again can increase the risk of harm, abuse or exploitation. We know that research sometimes doesn't occur at long-standing sites, so you often have researchers who drop in and out of specific sites internationally, may either place them at risk or may place the communities in which they're working in at risk if there aren't specific safeguarding policies and procedures in place. And then lastly, we know that there's historically been knowledge exploitation of local communities, so research being undertaken, data being collected without appropriate acknowledgement or benefit sharing of the research outputs. And so again, this is one of the issues that we really seek to address with our work on safeguarding. And so given these issues, we really think it's important to identify the specific safeguarding risks in the sector and sought to develop guidance to ensure the highest safeguarding standards across the sector. And so the overall aims of this work were really to support UK research funders to play a leadership role in setting tones and expectations around safeguarding in the context of research, to inform and improve how research institutes, organisations address issues, and then also work towards the adoption of joint principles and guidance across the sector. And we outline the scope of this work with guidance from the UK research funders who are present on this call, and then also an expert advisory group made up of experts in ethics, law, and gender violence, and a variety of different disciplines to essentially outline what we meant when we're talking about safeguarding in the context of international development research. And so our definition or scope is slightly wider than DFID's definition and goes beyond sexual exploitation, abuse and harassment, but also includes any broader forms of violence relevant to research, such as bullying, psychological violence, abuse or physical violence. And this guidance has been developed over an 18-month process, as Marta mentioned, in consultation with a variety of different actors involved in the international development research process, so including funders, individual researchers, research managers, research administrators, and a range of different actors involved in the research process. And some of the key milestones of this work has been that in 2018, we aligned UK research funders around a joint commitment to raise safeguarding standards across the international development research sector. And this commitment was launched at the DFID Safeguarding Summit in October 2018, alongside a number of other cross-sector commitments from the private sector, from UN agencies, from other donor bodies and the NGO community. And the signatories to this commitment were the funders who were represented on this call, so DFID, but also the Department of Health and Social Care, UKRI, the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, and the Wellcome Trust. And we've also been engaged with the DFID cross-sector steering group to ensure that we're ensuring cross-sector learning with all the different sectors as they implement their various commitments. And so to implement our commitment, we've been working really with the UK funders, who again you'll hear from later. And this has been done largely through two phases. So the first phase of this work was a piece that we commissioned and was an evidence review led by the University of Sussex. And essentially the purpose of this evidence review was to provide some evidence into the nature and issues of safeguarding specific to international development research, and also to identify existing policies and practices. And from this evidence review, we outlined some draft good practice and principles. And so the second phase of this work was really to try and validate these principles and guidance and to make sure that they were globally applicable. And so acknowledging that our first phase was largely in consultation with stakeholders in the UK, we really sought to undertake international consultations, specifically in low and middle income countries, but also in the UK, to try and validate the principles, update them to make sure that they can be applied in different contexts. And so this second phase was undertaken by the University of Liverpool in partnership with us and the Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine, and also consultation hub leads in West Africa, Latin America and Asia. And again, you'll hear from all the different institutions that were involved in this process. And from that series of consultations, which consisted of in-country interviews across all these different regions, and also an international survey, which was pretty much shared across the world, and we received over 500 responses to this. And from all of this work, we developed the guidance for safeguarding in international development research. And then given the context of COVID-19 and the ongoing crisis, we also developed a companion piece to highlight specific safeguarding considerations in the context of not just COVID-19, but other global health emergencies. And so the guidance itself really aims to support everyone involved in research to anticipate, mitigate and address potential and actual harms throughout the research process, all the way from funding to the dissemination of research. And the guidance takes the form of 4 key principles, which I will expand on a bit later in this presentation. Based on the in-country consultations, it was felt that it was important that this guidance was non-prescriptive, as it was felt that prescriptive guidance could potentially be impractical, may reinforce North-South power dynamics, and really wouldn't be applicable to different contexts, but also to different disciplines and across different types of research projects. So the resulting guidance is not prescriptive for these reasons, and it actually takes the form of questions tailored to key stakeholder groups. So there are a series of questions for everyone involved in the research process, so vice chancellors, research managers and administrators, private lead PIs, individual researchers and the community. And these are framed around the 4 key principles, which I will touch on later in this presentation. And then lastly, the guidance also highlights 6 case studies which demonstrate examples of what good practice looks like. And so the guidance really tries to highlight considerations to overcome challenges that were identified in the evidence review and through listening to the research community. And so some of the challenges that were identified initially were really the issue of safeguarding falling between the cracks of the ethical review process. And so this guidance really supports those involved in research to put in place and practices that go beyond ethics, beyond the project, and really provide additional consideration for issues like researcher conduct, financial scope. This guidance also really highlights how safeguarding considerations aren't just for those working with traditionally vulnerable communities, but actually are applicable across all disciplines. So we had some comments around people thinking that if they worked in a lab, that safeguarding may not necessarily apply to them as they're not working directly with vulnerable communities. But actually what this guidance really highlights is that everyone involved in research, particularly in international development research, has some safeguarding responsibility. And then similarly, the guidance also highlights why safeguarding is the responsibility of research institutions. So there was a notion that some research institutions felt that safeguarding was really under the remit of NGOs rather than academia, which is focused on knowledge production. And actually what this guidance does is highlight why safeguarding is the responsibility of research institutions. And the guidance also helps to address some of the barriers which were highlighted throughout this whole process. So some of the barriers that were initially identified were around concerns about career prospects if they reported safeguarding incidents. Again, a fear of jeopardizing the research if incidents were reported, concerns about not being seen as being a good field worker if you're unable to bear hardships, and also disparaging attitudes of colleagues and supervisors. So these were all barriers to reporting that were identified. And what the guidance does is really take a rights-based approach to address these barriers that is integrated across the research process. And also the guidance is equitable, co-designed, and seeks to address safeguarding issues across the research process. And so these are the four key principles that came up from the guidance. And so the first principles was around the centrality and the importance of rights of victims, survivors, and whistleblowers being central, and also the need for meaningful and effective pathways for redress of any safeguarding issues. The second thing, and this really came up strongly in the in-country interviews, and I'm sure Linnea will expand on this later, was really the importance of equity and fairness and the involvement of research partners at the research design and planning stage to ensure that all of the research questions and methodologies that are developed are contextually appropriate and don't pose an unacceptable risk of harm. The third principle was really the importance of transparent policies, procedures to ensure good practice. So these are things like clear public commitments and policies and openness about incidents and breaches. And the last was around the importance of accountability and good governance to underpin this. And as I mentioned before, the guidance is for a number of different stakeholders, and each of the questions highlighted in the guidance are targeted at these stakeholders listed here. So all the way from research funders to members of the research community. And the questions are targeted at these groups around the four key principles highlighted. And so just to give a practical example of what the guidance looks like for one of these groups. So this is just pulled from the questions that an individual researcher could be asking themselves. And again, this could be for an individual researcher, a research assistant, a field worker, a data collector. And so some of the questions, for example, that an individual researcher could be asking themselves around rights of victims, survivors and whistleblowers is, do I know my rights as a researcher? Do I know about being able to refuse to go to locations that are uncomfortable? Do I know what safety protocols are in place to protect me? And again, this is just another practical example for PIs to be considering. So focusing on transparency this time. So thinking about have we got a shared understanding in the team around how a researcher should conduct themselves in the field? Are there formalized processes and written protocols? And has this openly been discussed with partners and researchers prior to the research taking place? So there are a series of questions for all the different stakeholder groups to ask themselves, really to consider what values they hold to when undertaking the research and what to put in place to ensure that they are following them. Again, so one of the things that came up as being really important was the need for understanding what good looks like. And so thinking about what good safeguarding policy looks like, an example of what embedding safeguarding in your work actually looks like. And there are 6 case studies which cover these different areas. And these are drawn from the in-country interviews, but also from the evidence review in phase 1. And so just to give an example of what the case study looks like, case study 2, for example, had an example of a higher education institute that really sought to embed safeguarding in their various different processes. So all the way from training to inclusion of safeguarding considerations in their ethics processes. And then case study 5 took more of an individual researcher or research team perspective, thinking about how to design research studies with communities who have, sorry, just going back to the previous slide, with communities who've experienced trauma and to make sure that you're not re-traumatizing them through the research process. And then, as I mentioned before, given the ongoing context, we developed a COVID-19 companion piece, and this really just details additional considerations that those involved in research should be considering during this time. More thinking about, I guess, funders, researchers and research administrators, but really considerations around what are the safeguarding issues that might be more prevalent in an outbreak, given that research happens at a more rapid pace. There are also specific risks that can occur due to the crisis, and also just making sure that there are still clear safeguarding protocols in place, despite the fact that there is an ongoing crisis. And actually it becomes more important to have these protocols and procedures in place during a crisis like this. And so it takes a similar form to the main guidance. So it's questions structured around the 4 key principles, but really this is just a companion piece, and the main guidance is still applicable even in this context. So I'll stop there, but if you want to find out more, you can find this on our safeguarding resources page, and we can also share, if you subscribe to our newsletter, you can receive updates on this work and other activities that we're undertaking. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Sheila, for this overview. I understand that we're still having some technological difficulties with bringing Charlotte Watts on the line, so we'll next move on to hear from the funders. But before I do that, I would like to encourage everyone to keep using the Q&A function to get your questions in, as we will come back to these during the panel discussion at the end. Okay, so over to the funder group. So we will now hear from the funders on their engagement with the funders group that led to the development of the guidance, and particularly how they have used the guidance and the development of safeguarding policies in practice. And I'm going to invite each organisation to introduce themselves and their organisation, and they'll have 5 minutes each to present their perspectives. I'll first start with Sarah Ball from the UKRI. Over to you, Sarah.
Thank you very much, Marta. So as Marta said, my name is Sarah Ball. I'm Senior ODA Policy Manager at the UK Research and Innovation. And UK Research and Innovation has been working with UKCDR for the last 18 months on the development of the evidence base and the guidance that you've just had Sheila mention and Marta talk about. So we at UKRI have used the evidence base produced by David Orr and his team to help frame the issues and to frame our thinking. And we have used the UKCDR guidance to help develop our Preventing Harm in Research and Innovation policy, which was recently published in May 2020. This policy specifically points to the UKCDR guidance as a useful resource for the research and innovation community to help them address the expectations that are set out in our policy. As I said, our policy was published in May, but we recognise that there will be or that it's necessary to have a transition period. So we anticipate that the policy will come into full effect in spring 2021. UKRI are planning a series of communication activities over the next few months, and we would very much welcome feedback from the community on the policy as it is published, with the expectation that we may iterate and refine based on your feedback and comments. So we value your feedback and look forward to hearing from you. That's all I have to say. Thank you very much, Marta.
Okay, thank you very much, Sarah. Thank you very much, Sarah. So we'll now move on to the Wellcome Trust, and Kerry Garford is going to give us her perspective. Over to you, Kerry.
Thanks, Marta. Good afternoon, everyone. As Marta said, my name's Kerry Garford. I'm the Grants, Policies and Liaison Officer at Wellcome. And Wellcome was really happy to be involved in the Funders Forum to oversee the development of this guidance. So Wellcome published its bullying and harassment policy in May or June 2018. So we've been watchfully waiting for the UKCDR guidance to be released to assess whether our existing policies cover the requirements. Importantly, Wellcome is not the employer of the researchers, and so we see our role as being to support employers to support their people, as well as making sure that our own policies and processes reflect best practice. So since the guidance has been published, we've included signposting to it in our Good Research Practice guidance. We'll also include reference to it in our Research Involving People in Lower Middle Income Countries guidance. Now, this is being updated later this year. We've also started a much larger exercise mapping the guidance to our existing policies to really identify any gaps or where we need additional guidance. Once we've completed that, we'll be looking at what the most effective responses would be, whether we can amend existing documents as they are very fluid, they're not set in stone, or whether we would need something that is very safeguarding specific. So as a UK charity, the UK Charity Commission has a much broader definition of safeguarding that we need to be mindful of. And so we're working towards an approach where safeguarding runs through all our work like a thread. This is a work in progress and something that we will be looking at over the coming months. And that's my update, as if I pass back to Marta now.
Okay, thank you, Kerry. So we're now going to move to BEIS, and Ben Rayner is going to give us his presentation.
Thank you very much, Marta. So yes, my name is Ben Rayner. I work at BEIS, the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, and I'm a senior fund manager on the Newton Fund and the Global Challenges Research Fund, two ODA funds. BEIS has been involved with the UKCDR safeguarding group since its inception and has found the discussions and guidance in this group invaluable for reviewing BEIS approaches and policies. BEIS relies on expert delivery partners to deliver the Newton Fund and the Global Challenges Research Fund. So in devising our safeguarding policies, there is a balance to be found between codifying, embodying and defining BEIS's commitment to promoting best practice and safe research environments and providing a robust level of guidance and oversight without being overly prescriptive, given that our delivery partners are a varied group and have their own policies and procedures appropriate to their specialisms and areas of work. So what BEIS has done is taken the UKCDR guidance and used it to develop the principles and policies underlying a new safeguarding policy for the funds. This draft policy is currently being reviewed in consultation with our delivery partners, and the results of that consultation will inform other work going forward, such as embedding safeguarding policies and considerations into other processes. And that's all from me, so I'll hand back to Marta now. Thank you.
I think Marta's just dropped off for a sec. So hi, I'm Nicole Huxley, the Communications Manager. I just want to invite Kweku Wakom from DFID to speak next.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon or good morning, good evening, wherever you find yourself. I think maybe there's a bit of a technical difficulty. But as Nicole has mentioned, my name is Kweku Akom, and I'm the Human Development Advisor with DFID in our safeguarding unit here in London. And yeah, as already been mentioned, DFID has been instrumental in moving the area of safeguarding forward. And this started really at the back of what happened in early part of 2018 around Haiti. And around that time, DFID made a commitment, if you like, to look into this because it was quite damaging. Any report of safeguarding. So DFID made an investment, and as part of that process, we carried out the summit, the safeguarding summit, in October 2018. And as part of that process, different groups, we had age groups that made commitment in that summit to take safeguarding forward. And one of those groups is the research funders group, which part of that commitment is to come up with a guidance for the international development research community. And that work has culminated in this guidance and how we are disseminating this guidance today. So DFID has been part of it, has been instrumental, has been quite active member of this process. And we are really happy and glad that we've got this product, which is quite useful. And we hope all other research actors in the research community will be able to use it, find it useful, and move forward. For DFID, we are very much looking forward to using this guidance. We have a research department that is looking to use this guidance together with our partners in the research process. And I have to also say here that as part of this process, we felt that it's important to highlight the issue around COVID-19, which once again led to the complementary document that Sheila touched on. So in crises like this, more than ever, there's the need to look into safeguarding when we go out to do research, basically because yeah, evidence clearly suggests that during crisis, safeguarding issues, whether it's harassment, whether it's bullying, whether it's discrimination, all of them go up due to the nature of emergencies and the, if you like, breakdown of social coping mechanisms. So we are very happy that this is done, and we look forward to working with all partners in research and taking this great work forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kweku. Now we will hear from Alison McEwen from the Department of Health and Social Care.
Thanks, Nicole. Hello, everybody. Yes, I'm Alison McEwen from the Department of Health and Social Care. We have quite a lot of different ODA-funded programmes that we're working with. But just to highlight that today I'll be talking mainly about the funding that we have through the NIHR's Global Health Research Programme. So as other colleagues have said, we work very closely together with the other funders. And so what we're trying to do is build in a kind of overarching approach to safeguarding across the NIHR. So far, we have included safeguarding clauses in all of our contracts, all of our global health research contracts, and all of our award holders have received a letter updating them with the new guidance from UKCDR, including the update on COVID-19 as well. So what we're doing kind of wider with NIHR is making sure that as safeguarding is a universal problem, regardless of where the activity takes place, is that we're addressing that across everything that we do in the NIHR. So aligned with the other funders, we're developing guidance for the NIHR specifically in terms of how we're going to approach safeguarding through our contracted research. And obviously working very closely with the others to make sure that the messages we're sending out to our award holders are aligned, so as not to confuse the research community. What we're doing will also align very much with the research integrity agenda. So we're looking also to incorporate issues of bullying and harassment, as well as whistleblowing around what we're doing on safeguarding. So currently we're working with the NIHR legal team to develop clauses that apply across all of our contracts, and that will set out some of the expectations that we have and the actions that we will expect that will be taken should any allegations come to light. So we will have some accompanying guidance, as I said, from the NIHR, but that will very much build on the UKCDR guidance that's already been presented today. So in addition to the contracts and clauses, we're going to be ensuring that safeguarding is also built into all the due diligence that we do, and also incorporating it into some of our monitoring procedures. In terms of how reporting allegations will be kind of monitored and managed through our programmes, again, we're looking at the moment what that means for NIHR, and we will be having some named leads within the NIHR coordinating centres and providing some training for our award holders as well. That is all very much in planning. And we look forward to be able to sharing more in due course, hopefully over the summer, through a statement, and again linking back to this guidance we're discussing today and having a standalone NIHR policy. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you, Nicole, for stepping in while I was having some technological difficulties. So thank you very much to the funders for providing their perspectives. And we're now going to turn to the researchers who are going to give us their perspective on how the guidance has been used and how can it be used by the research community. And so first of all, we're going to hear from Linnea Renton, who was the delivery lead on the University of Liverpool team who developed the guidance in partnership with UKCDR. And Linnea is an independent consultant, but will be speaking in her role as research fellow on safeguarding for the Anti-Slavery Knowledge Network at the University of Liverpool. She will be discussing how the team have applied the principles of good safeguarding in the guidance and development process. Over to you, Linnea.
Thanks very much, Marta, and great to be with everyone. And it's really exciting to have heard from some of the funders about how things are already starting to be used. So that's very exciting. I'm just going to share my screen now. I know there's a little bit of a delay, but I hope that that is coming through. Because as Marta said, I've been, as part of the core team who produced the guidance, I've been asked to give some reflections on the process of developing it and the principles behind it and how we've been using it and promoting it since it was published. So first of all, just to give an idea of, there we go. To give an idea of the team who were involved, yes, say University of Liverpool and Anti-Slavery Knowledge Network, we knew from the outset that we wanted it to be a very inclusive and collaborative process. So the first thing to do was reach across town, as it were, to the Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine, who we knew were already doing some great work on safeguarding, obviously particularly in relation to global health, and through their work with the Arise Hub on issues of health and equity for urban dwellers, and you'll be hearing more about that shortly. And then between us, with our different research networks, we were lucky enough to recruit 3 excellent and very experienced researchers to act as consultation hub leads in the 3 different regions, as Sheila mentioned earlier. in terms of the approach that we took, we knew that right from the outset that the rights of survivors needed to be central, and that was part of the brief that we were given, but also fit very much with the approach that we would have taken by instinct anyway, because we, you know, as a team, that was the way that we approach things. And that also meant a focus on power dynamics, looking at who has the power to define risk and harm and vulnerability. So implicit within that is very much a decolonizing lens to research, which I think at its most basic it means subverting the assumptions that certain people, certain groups, certain countries are always the objects of research rather than but never the architects of the research. And we wanted very much to turn that on its head. So again, as Sheila mentioned, we tried to put those principles into practice as we developed the guidance, in terms of it being a co-designed process, co-authoring, and also, quite importantly, paying the researchers, the consultants equally across all the regions. So there were 4 consultants involved, including myself, but we wanted to ensure, that was part of the principle, that all 4 consultants were paid at the UK rate, because everyone was making an equal effort, and we felt that that was an important way of embodying our principle of equity within the process as well. And has also been mentioned, it became very clear during the process that if we came up with a set of strict requirements that would be imposed, that in many ways would replicate the power dynamics that we were trying to upend. So it became clear to us that we would need to frame the guidance as questions rather than as a checklist. I think Sheila's already referred to the different groups, so I won't go into any detail on that, but I think you may sometimes hear people saying, you know, safeguarding is everyone's responsibility, but when that often ends up meaning it's no one's responsibility, because it falls between the cracks and nobody knows exactly what their role within it is. So we wanted to target the questions very specifically at the different roles throughout the research chain, because everybody has a role to play, but that role is different depending on, you know, where you sit in that chain, as it were. So I wanted to just give 4 specific examples of some of the findings that came out of the process before I move on to looking at how the University of Liverpool has promoted and applied the guidance. One of the things that came out very strongly in terms of, there were 4 different kinds of harm that came out in different ways that we wanted to address as part of the guidance. On the left there, you see, this is something that came from a key informant in Guatemala, that you cannot prevent what you cannot see. And what she was talking about there was that she said safeguarding is about prevention. Prevention means avoiding, and you can't avoid something you can't see. And you cannot see something that you don't have the mindset for. So that was just a really great way to sum up the fact that if you're imposing an external lens or an external definition of what risk and harm and vulnerability look like, or what good solutions look like, that is going to undermine safeguarding. Then another example, I think, again, Sheila referred briefly to this, although of course the main focus, the main driver for this safeguarding process in some ways has been about sexual exploitation, and of course that is a huge issue that we all need to address. But there are other kinds of exploitation and harm as well. And what came out strongly in the consultations was that financial harm is also a safeguarding issue, and that includes things like slow and inefficient payment processes by your university or granting council creates real harm for people on the receiving, or shall I say non-receiving end of it, if they're waiting a long time for payments or funding to come through. And that also relates to the issue of financial inequities in terms of rates of pay for different types of researchers, depending on whether you're quote unquote local or quote unquote international. even if the international person's work could never happen or be successful without the work that's happening locally. A third one was about avoiding extractive research, and whether and how you feed back to the participants and the community really does matter. A good example of this was from one of the consultation partners in Ghana, who work on modern slavery, and they use forum theatre to feed back the findings of the research to the participants and community in a way that is both accessible and meaningful to them. So that was a great example of how good safeguarding can also be embodied in the way that you feed back research. And then finally, on the subject of re-victimization or re-traumatization, Sheila mentioned the example of the East Africa group that made up of and for former child soldiers who have done a brilliant job of changing who sets the rules of engagement for researchers. They have come up with a code of conduct for how they will and will not engage with researchers, so that they're not having to be re-traumatized by answering the same questions over and over again about their past, when they've said, we want also to be asked about what skills we're contributing to our communities now and what aspirations we have for the future. So that is just a brilliant example of a survivor-centered approach to safeguarding in research. So those were just a few examples of some of the things that have come out during the consultation process that I wanted to highlight. But then finally, I wanted to, I was asked both how the University of Liverpool has engaged with the guidance, but also this might constitute some useful tips for other organizations. One of them, of course, the first thing is to raise awareness, and so that has involved a lot of presentations to key governance committees like the university's ethics committee, the research and impact strategy committee, Global Challenges Research Group, the Research Staff Association, and so on. And I'm pleased to say that the university has actually officially adopted the guidance within the Research Ethics Committee and for the International Research Partnerships team. Of course, it's early days, so we'll have to wait and see how they actually apply it in practice, but it's a great first step. Then a few other examples at departmental level. I think it links back to what a couple of the funders were saying as well, that the guidance is now being used to review and strengthen research proposals. It's being incorporated into training and used as a basis for teams to do SWOT analysis and action planning. And people have said that because it's in that form of questions and case studies, it's very approachable, it's very friendly to use, and it's sort of ready-made to turn into a little mini workshop or the basis of a team meeting. And then finally, just to emphasize that safeguarding is not just about qualitative research or how you conduct an interview, and it's not just about international research. It really is taking this, if we take this decolonizing approach and a rights-based approach, it's really about the whole process of developing and using knowledge. So it needs to permeate the entire research culture. That's about your governance, your curricula, and so on. And at the end of the day, the goal is to end up with better research, better researchers, and better research institutions. So that is what we have hoped to achieve. And with everyone who's participating in this workshop, with your help, we hope we'll get there. Thanks very much.
Fantastic, Linnea. That's been really helpful. And really good to have some tips as well in there about how you've been using them. So now we're going to hear from Professor Sally Theobald, who is the chair in the Social Sciences and International Health at the Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine, and she's a co-PI of the ARISE GCRF Accountability for Informal Urban Equity Hub. And we'll also hear from Dr. Bintu Mansare, who's a research fellow in the ARISE Hub, and she led the safeguarding consultation in Sierra Leone and was involved also in the development of the UKCDR guidance. And together they will be discussing the role of the ARISE Hub in country consultation, played in the development of the guidance, how Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine has been using the guidance, as well as the hub in Sierra Leone, and any additional tips that they can share on how to use the guidance to ensure good safeguarding practice in the international research partnerships and consortia. Over to you both. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marta. Delighted to be here and sharing the experiences of the ARISE Hub. So we are a UKRI Global Challenges Research Fund hub on accountability for informal urban equity. And here on this slide, you can see some of our safeguarding champions in a meeting that we held together in Dhaka this time last year. Seeing this slide, I feel I should note and say safeguarding is not just not only women's work, and we do have some male safeguarding champions too, they're just not in that photo. So next slide, please. So we started our ARISE processes in February last year, and the ARISE, as we heard from Linnea, the ARISE Hub was a partner in the UKCDR guidance, so we fed some of our ARISE learning into the UKCDR guidance, and what we're presenting today is ARISE processes as a practical case study to address some of the guidance in line with the values that are incorporated in the guidance. So the ARISE Hub focuses on accountability, health, equity, inequities in growing informal urban spaces, so also known as slum contexts, and we work in partnership with different researchers, advocates, Slum and Shack Dwellers International, practitioners in Sierra Leone, Kenya, Bangladesh and India. And what you can see there is a word cloud which comes through a participatory process that we went through with colleagues who are working in informal urban contexts, also living in informal urban contexts through different federations that are part of Slum and Shack Dwellers International, on what safeguarding means to them, what the words that link to safeguarding come to mind. And I think participatory processes that link to the lived realities of different groups are so important. So next slide, please. So we've written up our experiences of preventing and addressing safeguarding concerns, practice, process and positionality in marginalised spaces as a practice paper in BMJ Global Health. And much of what we're going to share today is within that paper. So it's a resource if you want to go to it. So this is a jointly authored paper that draws on the skills, experience, tacit and embedded knowledge from across the ARISE Hub family. Next slide, please. So what I want to run through really is what's in the paper. So first of all, we talk about safeguarding in global health and vulnerability as a relational concept. So that if you look in the realities of informal urban contexts, we see that intersections of inequity play out. They're shaped by gender, class, caste, sexuality, disability, and they're shaped by unequal power relations, and that we can locate safeguarding risks then within broader social structures. So we then run through the different steps we've undertaken in ARISE to develop a shared approach to safeguarding. So first of all, sharing institutional guidelines and practice. There was lots of different policy and practice available from across the different contexts, not always called safeguarding, not often called safeguarding, but highly relevant in terms of child protection, addressing gender discrimination. We shared that. We then went through a participatory process, and we were very much supported at this point by Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine safeguarding lead Phil Tubb, so I want to acknowledge and thank her. So a participatory process across the hub to understand and agree definitions for our ARISE hub, and to have a reflection on understandings of vulnerabilities, how they're situated, how they're relational, and the risks and mitigation strategies to respond to that. We then developed action plans for safeguarding. We have a ARISE hub meeting. It's a virtual meeting in 2 weeks' time. We're reviewing and updating those action plans in response to COVID-19 pandemic and the implications of that. We then summarize our key learnings. So looking at how safeguarding, ethics, health and safety concerns overlap with also research integrity, the challenges of referral and support for safeguarding concerns within frequently underserved informal urban spaces. And we talk about the importance of ongoing reflective practice, of critical thinking about power, about judgments, about discussions around safeguarding, the importance of a critical lens on positionality, and as Linnea has said, the importance of situating thinking and learning here within decolonisation debates. So I'm going to hand over to Bintu now, who's going to take you through the next slides, and then I'll finish with some summary comments. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. So as a hub, what we decided to do was get every country to tell us their policies, what they currently have around safeguarding. And as Sally previously said, it wasn't called that. Child protection policy, early marriage protection, so that this will feed into the safeguarding policy we were doing for ARISE. And as you see on the screen, there will a lot. So we had to see what was relevant and what we needed. Next slide, please. And also ARISE, there was a safeguarding course or training online that was basically set up so that researchers would have an idea what safeguarding was. And Phil, that was the head of LSTM, got a notification when everyone completed the course. So we just know where everyone was, that everyone had an idea what it meant, what safeguarding meant. And we brainstormed safeguarding and tried to get local terms for safeguarding that basically gave the same meaning in our local languages. Like in Sierra Leone, in Creole, it's tiktem. It might be different, but it gets the gist of what safeguarding was. And we also decided to go through safeguarding issues with our co-researchers and our researchers in country. And it was interesting to see similarities and differences on safeguarding issues across different contexts between Kenya and Bangladesh and India. So we got all of the safeguarding issues. For example, in Sierra Leone, there are safeguarding issues around the rainy season, doing research during the rainy season, because the informal settlements we work with, there is flooding and homelessness and displacement during this period. So that has to be put as a safeguarding issue for Sierra Leone. And after collecting these safeguarding issues, we then decided to set up a training, because safeguarding is new in Sierra Leone. It's not known as that. So we set up training for all co-researchers, everyone involved in the ARISE project. And we used it. Next slide, please. Thank you. These are all the policies that were gathered. Let's go to the next slide. So this training, as you see, this slide shows the different safeguarding issues that were arising, because it differs from context to context. Child marriage, FGM, maybe safeguarding issues in one context and in one country, but they are not in another. So coming in as researchers to work, you have to know that and have that at the back of your mind whilst developing your safeguarding policies. So we use this UKCDR guidance as what it was used for, as a guide, and then we contextualized it, and then we did training. The training was interesting. We brainstormed again on the safeguarding issues that the co-researchers knew, that the participants understood. We got all of their ideas, and that also helped us in developing referral pathways, because that is not in the guidance. What happens when somebody breaks the safeguarding policy? So these policies, these issues helped us to have referral pathways. What organizations are responsible for what? And we developed that also and put it in our safeguarding training. Next slide. I think it shows the training. Yes, so some countries have cartels as safeguarding issues. Other city council officials, we talked about bribery and delaying in payments, and this fed into our safeguarding policy in ARISE. The next slide. So this was the training that was conducted, and it included co-researchers of all the settlements that we worked in, because we wanted to ensure that everyone knew what safeguarding is, everyone knew what the policy says. We went through the guidance and we used the ones that we developed, and they really helped us, and everyone left that training having an idea of what it means, what safeguarding was, safeguarding them, the participants, the researchers, how do they report. Everything was fed during this training. So the training was very important, and that helped us in the guidance. And that fed also to UKCDR that I was a part of. And this was just exercises that we did. We did presentations, exercises, video trainings, using the guidance as a guide. Thank you.
So next slide, please. So thank you so much, Bintu. So these are just the final slides really to demonstrate our learning and our thinking that has come across already in this webinar, that safeguarding, like ethics, is not a tick box exercise. It's an ongoing, critical and reflexive journey that includes partnership. It needs to include participatory processes, reflexivity and building of trust. And that also needs to speak to those key values that come through in the guidance of equity and fairness, transparency, accountability, and having different vulnerable groups and survivors at the heart. So we all have a role to play in safeguarding. The questions in the guidance are really situated to get us thinking critically about that and about our role. So next slide, please. So this is just to say thank you from the ARISE Hub, and we look forward to being part of these ongoing discussions. I think we need supportive cultures of mutual support as we continue our ongoing learning journey in safeguarding. And final slide is just some acknowledgements. Thank you so much.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Sally and Bintu. That was really helpful. So I hope that this has given a flavor for how the guidance can be used or has been used by both funders and researchers. And I'll now like to open the Q&A session with the panel members. So as a reminder, the panel will comprise of Sheila Mbura from UKCDR, who provided the overview, the funders groups with representatives from DFID, BASE, UKRI, Welcome and DHSC, and the researchers, Linnea Renton, Bintu and Sally. So thank you all for your contributions, and I will now start with picking up the questions that have been upvoted the most from the chat. So the first question I will ask Linnea to answer. There is a question here about from Lorraine. How do you maintain equitable partnerships whilst also getting partner organizations in some LMICs to adhere to the aims of gender, equality, respect for protected characteristics and rights for LGBTI+ people? Linnea.
Thanks very much, Martha. I think that's known in football as a hospital pass, or maybe in rugby. You get thrown the ball just before someone crashes into you. My first reaction was a brilliant question. My second one is that there is a huge research project you could do just on that question. But I would say that for us, yeah, I guess I would kind of turn the question around and say equity for whom? If you're talking about an equitable partnership, who are your research partners? Because those groups that you mentioned are not just the researched, they should also be the researchers. Because one of the best ways that you can safeguard the rights of various groups of people, I mean, my background is working on HIV and sexual and reproductive health. And if you look at the work that the Global Network of People Living with HIV does through research on the Stigma Index, that is by training people living with HIV. Sorry, I will turn off the video if the connection isn't good. I hope that the sound is better now. That people living with HIV are the researchers, and therefore, you know, they are more likely to understand that lived experience and be effective and be trusted as researchers as well. So I think, as I say, you always have to put at the center of it the rights of people who are actual or potential victims of harm. And if that means you have to stop your research, then so be it. You know, because if the way that you are approaching it is something that would cause harm to, you know, whatever group of people you're talking about, then that research is not equitable, and you are not carrying out safeguarding. I know that's a very incomplete answer, but I hope it suggests a few lines of inquiry.
Okay, thank you, Linnea. We've had a question as well for the funders, and this question is asking whether, sorry, just a second. So this question is asking whether the guidance on the safeguarding is encouraging funders to rethink their funding model. For example, there's still an emphasis on UK PIs leading on the project as opposed to international PIs. If we rethink these partnerships, we could potentially see these policies and guidance embedded and thought about by LMICs more readily. I think we've got Kerry from Wellcome who could potentially address that question from the perspective of Wellcome Trust.
Thanks, Marta. Yeah, so I think this is a really interesting question. So from Wellcome's perspective, most of our response mode funding is set up to allow organisations from low and middle income countries to apply, and often we only allow UK organisations or Irish organisations or low middle income countries to apply. And we're also doing a lot of work to try and shift the centre of gravity over to the global south, so that researchers from those areas, we're encouraging them to take the lead and trying to put the power in their hands, rather than always encouraging global north researchers to be the lead PIs. So we've got our Alliance for Accelerating Excellence in Science in Africa, and we've also got our India Alliance. And I think the hope for this guidance is that it will allow us to continue that work and will underline the continued importance of that.
Thank you, Kerry. And we can also hear from Ali McCuan from Department of Health and Social Care.
Yeah, thanks, Marta. Just very briefly as a follow-up to Wellcome's answer and just to the question, really good question, and that is certainly the direction of travel where we want to go. As you may know, the NIHR was originally set up to support research in England primarily, so it has been a bit of a challenge for us in opening up the mechanisms to fund directly to international partners. But that's certainly where we're going. We're strengthening our due diligence procedures. We are, as you might have noticed, this year we're opening up our first call, which will fund directly to LMIC country leads. And in the meantime, what we have done is, rather than have a UK PI, is very much promote the shared joint lead applicant model. So we have a UK and an LMIC lead as we move towards, as I said, having direct leads within LMICs. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much, Ali. And Kweku, the DFID has developed a research support hub. Could you please elaborate on that a little bit more? Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Marta. So DFID, as part of the process of, if you like, supporting partners across the aid sector, including partners of research, in this case, is what we call the Resource and Support Hub. So this is, if you like, an online platform that is primarily aimed at organizations in low and middle income countries, if you like, small local or national NGOs and civil society organizations. So basically, the Resource and Support Hub is, if you like, curating resources that are applicable and that are relevant and useful for organizations to go to and draw from when they are looking into issues around safeguarding and how they can, if you like, access support in building their capacity in doing so. So it's really, if you like, a good resource which was launched last month. And then we also have, if you like, a regional hub set up in Ethiopia. There's one more that's going to be set up in Africa, and then Southeast Asia. So for those of you on the call who would like to have more details on this, I think maybe Sheila, you can share the link to the Resource and Support Hub. In this case, if you send out notes to the participants. And I have to say on funding in particular, DFID, we've also made it a point that whenever partners bid for any program, they are always welcome to add a bit into their operational budget to cover safeguarding issues because we take this seriously. Thank you.
Kweku, can I follow up with a question here that we've had from Nolene Morgan at the Queen's University of Belfast, and she's asking what happens when you have issues where international safeguarding principles do not match local laws. For example, where the age of consent for sexual activities and child marriage differ, and can we enforce these requirements in legal contracts where they do not contravene partner country laws? And would funders expect these requirements to be included in terms and conditions, even if not in line with in-country legal systems?
Yeah, that's a really important and good question. So DFID, from where we sit, we look at this with the international lens, which of course we need to apply to the local level. Now, as part of that process, we use, if you like, the UN definitions, for example, when it comes to children. So the age of consent for DFID, we've if you like, adopted the UN, which is below 18, for example. Although, for example, here in the UK, the age of consent is 16, for example. So we take that international perspective to this, and we are very much aware that some of these things, if you like, contrast with local laws, or if you like, the policy environment of some of the areas that we and our partners work in. So the advice here really is that we have, if you like, guidance around how our programs engage with partner governments in trying to understand some of the processes at the local level and how together we can work to address some of those things. But then when it comes to with contractual obligations, for example, we expect that most sovereign countries have signed up to UN conventions, including the rights of the child, for example. So therefore, the age of consent when it comes to contracts, as I said, is very, very difficult to have one that will fit all. So therefore, we at DFID, we apply the international definition, which is coming from the UN.
Thank you very much, Kweke, for answering that important question. And so just turning back to the question about funders rethinking their models, I wondered whether Sarah Ball from UKRI could provide UKRI's approach on this.
Thank you, Marta. So yes. Yeah, thank you, Marta. Yes, so very much along the lines of that Ali McKeown from DHSC just mentioned there. I mean, UKRI is primarily a UK funder of UK-based research. So yes, many of our programs have traditionally supported UK-based PIs as or UK-based researchers as the principal investigator. However, UKRI has started to move in the direction of more direct funding overseas. For example, our recent funding of Centres of Excellence with the African Research Universities Alliance and our global engagement networks, which have had international principal investigators. So I think, you know, these are pilot programs, but I think we would be looking to consider this direction of travel going forward. And in terms of the African Research Universities Alliance Centres of Excellence, I would say what we have done is worked with them to provide support for safeguarding training to help embed this within those Centres of Excellence as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. And so I'm now going to turn to Sheila. We have a question here about from Nolene about whether UKCDR is planning to develop any training or tools or resources for higher education institutes and their external partners. Sheila,
yeah. Great. Hopefully I'm on the screen now. Yeah, so this is something that we're asked quite frequently. We're not in the process of developing any training materials at the moment, but there are quite good training materials available on the Bond website. So Bond develops training materials largely for the NGO community, but there are some guidance on there around reporting incidents or around safeguarding considerations for leadership. So that would be a good resource to check. And also, Kwaku mentioned the DFID Resource and Support Hub, again, which has lots of sort of safeguarding training and is growing and building as safeguarding resources become available. And we'll also be updating and we'll be developing a safeguarding resource page on our website where we will put together any resources which may be specific to the research sector. But also just based on just following on from what Bintu mentioned in her presentation, because of the way our guidance is structured and in the way it takes the form of questions, it's actually it allows you to develop training materials and training tools from that. So again, that's a model that some universities are currently following, and that's something that you could also consider at your various institutions. But yeah, keep a lookout for our safeguarding resource page where we'll be updating any relevant training tools or resources for the research community.
Thank you, Sheila. So we've got here another question on the relationship between safeguarding and ethics, which I know some of the presenters have touched upon, but I wonder whether I could ask Sally or Bintu to come in here. So the question is, can you describe the relationship between safeguarding and ethics, both in principle and in practice? For example, how should safeguarding policies or protocols relate to ethics policies or protocols?
Hello, let me come in before Sally does. I think safeguarding is part of a wider set of ethical guidelines that are basically provided. The ethics guidance are basically provided by ethics boards in the country. But I think safeguarding actually belongs to the research institutions. It's something they can develop, they can tweak to fit into the particular research they're doing. Ethics guidelines, especially in our own context, in our own countries, is just one broad set of guidelines that is provided by the ethics board. Safeguarding protocols now, as I said, can be tweaked, can be used by everyone for any research to not only protect participants, but also to prevent harm, even when it is unrelated to the research. So this is where the protocols of safeguarding also differs. It is not only do no harm, it's also prevent harm from happening. And also, even when you witness harm that has nothing to do with your research, our safeguarding policies tell us it is also your responsibility to report and ensure that referrals are made. So this is one key difference between them, but safeguarding policies can also feed into the ethical guidelines and vice versa. I don't know, Sally, do you have anything else to add?
Hi, yeah, thank you, Bintu. That was a really brilliant answer on the conceptual level about how they link and their differences. I think I'll answer on a very practical level and say that there are clearly synergies, and I think what we need to do as we're building institutions, collaborators, to understand and address and take forward safeguarding concerns is to make links. So, for example, in our LSTM ethics form, we have questions around safeguarding. I've got them here on my computer. So who will have lead responsibility for dealing with safeguarding? Include any potential safeguarding issues that may arise during your research. How will you protect different vulnerable groups? Are there any common practices that you need to address? So making the links is important, I think, to ensure that safeguarding does not evaporate. And as we said, it's an ongoing journey, like ethics. So looking at ways to update safeguarding action plans, looking at processes of ethical review and ensure that safeguarding is part and parcel of that, looking at how we can make linkages across different trainings, be they ethics, be they safeguarding, and we need safeguarding training to be alive and responsive. So we're updating our safeguarding action plans right now in the light of COVID-19. It's really helpful to have the appendum guidance for UKCDR about COVID-19. And just to say, there's also been additional work done by CHS Alliance by Lucy Heaven-Taylor and Corinne Davey on safeguarding and harm and COVID-19 pandemic, which I think is helpful. So in summary, I think our learning from ARISE is that there is some overlap sometimes between ethics, safeguarding, research integrity, occupational health. What we need are system structures and processes that bring those to light and ensure ongoing reflection, action and learning. We're all learning. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Sally. So we've got a last couple of minutes for one final question before we close. And I do realize that there's a huge amount of questions that are coming in, really interesting ones, and we will try and address those in the FAQ, which we'll share at a later date. So the question here is from Williman from Intract for Civil Society from the NGO sector. And he's saying that the notion safeguarding is for NGOs, not academia, is interesting in the international NGO sector. You will often hear research ethics is not for NGOs, but for academia. And so should there be more dialogue between academia and research advisors and MEL officers of NGOs? I'm going to turn that question to Linnea, as I know that this is something that's come up as part of the consultations. Yeah,
I think, oh, is it?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, it's interesting actually that each sector wants to kind of kick the can down the road to a different sector. I think we need to recognize that wherever we're placed in this, we all have responsibility. And yeah, I think some more learning across the sectors or between, you know, academia and NGOs, that is starting to happen, but it would be good to see more of that, because I think there are some useful ways that the NGO sector often does research very much focused on action research and having impact on the ground, and those relationships with communities and often longer term relationships in communities, then I think Sheila mentioned the drop-in, drop-out bit, maybe sometimes with academic research. But that probably reflects my bias more as working within NGOs than academia. So yeah, I think more collaboration and sharing, as we're doing right now, is really important to you know, because none of us has got it fully right by any means, and each of us can learn from the other's successes and failures. So I think I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Helena. And from our side at UKCDR, we have been engaging across all the different sectors. DFID has also been very instrumental in bringing the different sectors together, and we're very keen always to learn and to enhance the dialogue. So I'm going to close the Q&A session now and thank all of the presenters and the panelists and all of you participants for your very interesting questions. I hope that you have found this to be a useful discussion. As mentioned, I know we haven't been able to answer all of your questions, and we will try and address as many of these as we can in the FAQ or direct specific questions to funders where relevant. I'm going to just close off with some final remarks here. As Sally and others and Sheila have mentioned, this is a long journey. It is a dialogue. It's the start of a dialogue, and we've been very keen to ensure that our guidance is guidance, is not prescriptive, and that it can be used as a tool for all of you involved in this sector and interested in this space to help improve your processes and together being able to tackle this important issue. So by no means are we saying we've got the complete set of answers, but we are committed to this, and and our members and our funders are strongly committed to this as well, and we're willing to take the journey with you and learn through experience. So just to say that we're always keen to get feedback so that we can improve this type of event in the future. And after the meeting, we will be sending you a feedback questionnaire, and we would really appreciate if we could take 5 minutes of your time to feedback on how this event has gone and to get your reflections. If you also want to know more about the work of UKCDR, we're also supporting funders on issues around equitable partnerships, around capacity strengthening, and now more specifically on COVID-19 in law and resource settings. Do look at our website, ukcdr.org, or sign up to our newsletter or follow us on social media at UKCDR. And finally, I'd just like to thank the speakers all once again, and those involved in developing the guidance, and all of you for participating today. We really were not expecting such a huge turnout, and it's been fantastic and remarkable that we've had such great interest. We look forward to continue to work with you to tackle harm in the international development research sector. Thank you very much. Goodbye.